Hello everybody, my name is Jeremy and you're watching the Morgue for the very last time. As a big send-off for this show, we're actually also doing a big send-off for an active MMO that's coming to a close later this year. Now typically when an MMO gets shut down, we don't know about it ahead of time just so much, but Sony actually announced this one ahead of time, just over summer, that Star Wars Galaxies is going to be closing towards the beginning of December later this year. Now at first when they announced this, we didn't really actually know why, but over the ensuing months, we've come to see that it's actually a licensing issue and probably has something to do with Tor. It probably just comes down to the fact that LucasArts wants to put all of their eggs into one basket. But for better or worse, the game is coming to an end, and so we're going to spend the entire episode today as a tribute to the passing of this landmark MMO. Because let's face it, this game had a whole myriad of things going for it. It has had its lumps, but it's also had some really great achievements along the way. And so I'm going to be bringing on a couple of correspondents to talk all about the highs and lows of Star Wars Galaxies. And now we get to the meat of the show. Everybody just sit back and relax because this is going to be a pretty meandering little conversation here. This is not a really fleshed out, well-rehearsed editorial. This is basically going to be me and two other nerds, gamers on the internet, just sitting around chatting about a game that we have all loved at one point or another. So joining me on the line is Heather, who you might also know as Marsbase, has joined me on some podcasts in the past, and Irish, who has also appeared on Stoked as well.
Hi, guys.
So welcome to the show, guys. Now, I figured that we would start off talking about some of our initial reactions to Star Wars Galaxies. You know, start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. So just to kind of get the ball rolling here, I want to tell you guys some of my first experience with the game. Did either of you play on launch day by any chance?
My husband did.
Your husband did. So he probably will sympathize with some of these stories I'm about to share because calling the launch of Star Wars Galaxies rocky is kind of like calling Jar Jar Binks a little grating. It's a massive understatement. I was actually flat out unable to play for at least 3 or 4 days at the time of launch, and this was a big thing for me. This was the first MMO that I was going to experience with Star Wars attached to it. Now, at this point in time, I believe that Knights of the Old Republic had already been out, like, recently, if I recall the timeline, or maybe I was playing Dark Forces or something like that. Anyway, I was already up to my eyeballs in playing Star Wars video games to get myself psyched for Star Wars Galaxies. I took a week off work.
Nice.
To be prepared to play this game. And a whole group of us that had played EverQuest together had set up like this chat room and AOL Instant Messenger where we could talk to each other and make sure we all ended up on the same servers and all this. But really what it turned out to, because none of us could play, was just a giant bitch and whine fest for 3 days straight in AOL Instant Messenger. You know, it was plagued with account validation issues, login server issues, easily the worst launch that I've ever experienced. And despite that experience, I still stuck around. What about you guys? What was your initial first few days of gameplay like?
I remember that the first experience was my husband got it first and he couldn't convince me to get it. So he's like, fine, well, I'm going to play. So he got it and he's playing. And I suddenly found myself practically leaning over him, trying to talk to people too, trying to insert my 2 cents. I was like, you know what? I better just get my own game.
And how long?
And he's like, excellent.
How long into it was before you joined? Because he was in at launch. Do you remember how long it took?
Or close to launch. I know it was under a week that it took me to be like, you know what? I want in on this too. I want fun.
Now, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the social side of it as we go along, but this is probably a good time to clarify that both Heather and I have not actually played this for a long time. We recently resubscribed to experience the end of game, end of world events, which I'll also talk about later because I've got some information about where this is probably leading, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But Irish, you actually played this game for longer than either of Heather or I. Came into it a little late, right? Do you remember your exact start date?
That was launch day in Europe, yeah. You guys got it 6 months before we got it over here.
Oh, okay.
And it was a nice confluence for me because 3 things arrived on one day. My first, I'll call it broadband connection, and then in the local game store, Galaxies, and beside it, KOTOR. And I remember installing Galaxies, and KOTOR was still in the wrapper a year later.
Oh.
But you played all the way up until, what was it, January of this year?
About January this year, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you've probably got a
And
little more of a different experience on this than Heather or I do, because
Yeah.
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
seem to have more tolerance for the different stages the game went through. I just kind of stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few periods where I would have played it intermittently, like I'm in a space of a month I might have logged on for a couple of hours, but I always came back to it.
Yeah.
Came back like a couple of times, but
I never did. I think I got completely dragged away by other games, but I always tried to keep an eye on Star Wars Galaxies because of some of the unique things that it did for the MMO industry in general, which is also another angle I want to continue to try and get back to as we talk about some of the specific mechanics that Star Wars Galaxies introduced. Let's get into the social side of this a little bit because as I continue my own anecdote of entering the world of Star Wars Galaxies, I wanted to be a smuggler. When I first rolled up, so I started on Corellia, is it? The home world of Han Solo. And, you know, I was going to be a smuggler. But part of smuggling at the time was that you had to learn to be a weaponsmith, I think it was, or something. There was a crafting component to it. So I started as a crafter.
Slicing, yeah.
Yeah, slicing.
That's right.
So I started as a crafter to actually like learn the crafting because I had also heard up to this point that it was a very involved system. And oh my God, is that an understatement?
yeah.
But, you know, my first day I wanted to go out and blast things with my blaster, so I walked outside of Corellia, and it just so happened that everybody and their mother had already cleared out every speck of wildlife in a 12 billion kilometer circle around this city, so there was nothing to be done. I wandered for hours looking for something to shoot, only to have it kill stolen from me, or just, you know, not get there in time to be able to claim it as my own. Terrible experience. I rushed back to the home city to just, you know, throw my hands up in the air. And I was about ready after the initial launch experience on top of that with all the, you know, actually at one point I was able to create a character that got deleted by the account system
Oh, no.
during the first couple days.
no.
So it was just a nightmare left and right. And so what finally prompted me to stay, though, was that I got so frustrated that I actually went to the cantina, because that's what you do in real life. When you get frustrated, you head to the bar. And there was such a vibrant community of entertainers and crafters that are just sitting there, you know, telling each other about their experiences with what they've already learned about the game and the crafting system, and helping each other with their entertainment experience. And image designers were all over the place. And there was, I remember the one thing that influenced me to take the route that I did in the game, which was eventually I became a tailor, and a pretty darn famous one on my server while I played long time ago. But that was because I met a tailor in the cantina who outfitted me with a free outfit. And it was just because she was grinding up. She was trying to get the most experience that she could to advance her profession. So it was like, well, my inventory's full of crap. Come here and I'll make you something. And it was just such a genuine social experience that I hadn't up until that point. Up until that point, I'd basically only played EverQuest and Anarchy Online, neither of which had a social community really to speak of. They were grinds. They were, you know, achievement-based games where you were going to work your way towards something. And I think Star Wars Galaxies is what first introduced me to the concept that MMOs aren't to be beaten. And actually, let's. I've been talking a lot here. Is there anything that you guys want to butt in? Just feel free to interrupt me anytime. But
Out of all the MMOs I've played, that was definitely the one that I was the most social in. I mean, everything else, it was, you know, talking to my husband, or, you know, we met our guildies, you know, a couple other people. But I was an image designer for a long time, and so I had the most fun creating little macros to advertise myself, you know, in character. So it's like, hey, Deader's on your trail, change your face. You know, just like chatting with people for 45 minutes, you know, just, you know, because they rush through the character creation system, and then they're like, I'm doomed. Help me, please.
I don't like
Please make me look
my
like I'm not been beaten up and left in an alleyway. And somebody actually said that to me once. So I, you know, just chat with people for 45 minutes or an hour, and I just go to the cantina on some nights and just like, you know, sign on my little dancer and, you know, dance and chat with people. And that's like what I was doing, is like chatting with people for the night.
You know, I think Star Wars Galaxies is a game from a bygone era where MMO designers were trying to build worlds that we could live in and less games to play. Most MMOs to this day kind of blur the line between those. They want to create a fully fleshed world that you can experience, but to a larger degree, it's a game that you're playing. And Star Wars Galaxies was one of the first truly sandbox experience, aside from like Ultima Online. But This really brought it home to a larger audience, and it was not a game. I mean, I think we can probably agree, Heather and I, we were around at the beginning, it wasn't a very fun game, mechanics-wise.
Most of the stuff I remember that was, fun at the back, it wasn't so much like going out. I mean, I remember a couple of big kills that we got to be in on and be like, oh, that was awesome. We actually killed something giant and cool.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it was, chatting with people, and
just
like
being
meeting
a part
different
of
people.
being part of the community and a part of the world.
Hunting down this tailor and then be like, oh my gosh, I love this tailor. I must go hunt them down. Or
Mm-hmm.
That's a little different from how I started. When I came into the game first, I literally had no idea about the combat system or anything else that was going on. So I landed on Crafter, and first experience was Bestine over in Tatooine, the main Imperial city.
Mm-hmm.
Run into a Crafter, and then he starts telling me how to scan for minerals and how to hand sample. And then he starts explaining, you need to make money, you need to get yourself an income. I was like, okay, it's not really a Star Wars game in that respect, but how do I do that? And then you start getting mission terminals and realizing you could get this little trade route going, take 2 missions in Bestine going towards Anchorhead, deliver your parts down there, and just keep doing this back and forward till you get your money.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I paid for my first vehicle, because vehicles come in the game like 2 or 3 weeks after I got there, and I was like, yay, I actually
You lucky
made money.
bastard. I had to walk across all of Tatooine.
Well, I ended up doing that by choice afterwards.
Dodging sand people in crates the whole way.
and had the skills involved to walk up that hill at a decent rate.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yes, that's true. And the clothing for that. But that was the whole thing, though. When you're wandering between the cities, like, because I started without a vehicle, it was literally walking. And if you saw something red, being a crafter, you ran the opposite direction. So what should take you 10 minutes to walk was taking you half an hour back and forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, it got to the point where, for me personally, at one point, because I had created harvesters that were out in the field, and I actually hired bodyguards. This is something, I mean, it's a social experience to that degree. These guys would not only follow me, but also would harvest the skins off the creatures for me as we went. Because as a tailor, I needed fur and leather and things like that.
Too.
Yeah. So we would walk all the way out to our my harvesters, and eventually we became business partners. He paid for more harvesters, basically. And he would protect me the whole way out there, and then give me the leathers, and then I would give him free clothing or whatever else that I think I bought him some armor at some point. So it was this huge socially driven economy. I think that's important to note too, is that crafters, all 3 of us had been crafters, it sounds like, at some point, and the crafters in Star Wars Galaxies were the game. They drove the entire economy.
I mean, the best armor was from crafters.
Yes, absolutely. And the best items, hands down, of any type were from crafters.
And you needed to know the exact people to buy your minerals from.
And crafters had to know other crafters as well, because like
to
armor,
get the pieces you needed.
Armor, it's been a long time, but also relied on good tailored items. And there were a number of other things like that. You had to get a good base item before you could build a better base on top of it. So you had to know the best crafters as well, which created these really robust communities of people interacting with one another. And then player cities came around. It was basically this built-in level of actual like game level, mechanic level community efforts. How do you guys feel about player cities? At one point I was a mayor, so I'll just tell you that right up front. You were too?
Yeah, I've run 3 different cities and different guilds and stuff like that, but my first experience of that was the same guy who kind of showed me the hand sampling a few days later in the game. I was wandering through and he just asked me, how are you getting on? Did you make some money? Are you enjoying the game? And he says, by the way, have you got a house? I'm like, no. How do I get a house? And then he literally walked me. I think every server had this. About 1.1k south of Bestine, there was a city there.
Yeah.
Brings me out, hands me a deed, I drop a house, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I've got like my own little space in this game.
Yeah.
And then it just goes from there.
Nice.
It was pretty incredible, but I don't know if this is something we'll ever see again in the MMO industry. Player-driven cities. Part of the problem here, and maybe I'll just get a little soapboxy here, but is they didn't work really well. They were hugely fun and really unique to experience, and I'm glad for the experience of actually having not only been a part of one of these, but eventually running a player city of this degree. But like politician as a class, how is that fun?
And a starter class as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can start as a politician. It's not even...
I mean, it was awesome, but I mean, I never got involved in any of the cities. I always wanted some, remote little cabin in the woods, except it would take you varying degrees of time to try to find a blank space in the world.
Yeah.
I was like, man, if only R2 and C-3PO had turned the other way or looked over the hill, they would have seen like 3 cities. Bam!
Seriously.
Oh, we're rescued. Never mind. Would have been a lot shorter movie.
Yeah, well, the whole trilogy would have been a lot shorter. How do you guys feel about the way that the trilogy has been handled with Star Wars Galaxies? I haven't played a lot, but Irish, you probably got a better opinion on this. The story, originally when Star Wars Galaxies launched, if you guys didn't know, the story was supposed to be taking place between episodes 4 and 5, between A New Hope and the best one, Empire Strikes Back. That's the best one, right? You just agree, right? Of course.
Yeah.
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but as the game has progressed, the story has actually progressed in the background as well.
Not as much as you think. The only thing they did to move it forward was they released a Hoth instance, which, don't get me wrong, was fantastic and is a great way to spend a couple of hours with a fleet, or a guild, I should say. But story-wise, it never progressed, and it's something that did hurt the game overall, is that you were stuck in that era between the two movies because that allowed them to have all your canon characters in there. You had Vader, you had Lando, you had all these other characters floating around the place that wouldn't be there if it was post-Jedi.
Well, let me tell you guys, because I'll go ahead and share some spoilers with you. I don't know if you've seen these on the internet, but apparently the end of the game events will take place in space and ground on Endor and will involve the Death Star, the final Death Star from Return of the Jedi. I don't have any more details about exactly how players will figure into that, but anybody that's right now a subscriber to the game will have the opportunity to participate in basically the end of Star Wars, of the known established canon.
Civil War points, and there's all sorts of math involved in calculating who's going to win.
Yeah, well, they've also actually shown, actually admitted that the Empire might win. That it's possible if the Rebels don't manage to blow up the Death Star, the Empire could destroy the Rebel base, I guess.
Well, there was always a little kind of hint in the background because there was a medal in the game you could get. Well, you couldn't really get it, but it was there saying, destroyed the Death Star. And they took it out, that was a joke in beta. But it was always there. So we're like, did they build something and not release it? What happened? And the latest trick where they threw atmospheric flight in, because we saw videos a couple of years ago where people like pulled out planets that weren't released, like Tanab. But also you had atmospheric flight. And now they just put it in as a game mechanic in what's the death knell of the game.
Right.
It's like, what else wasn't released?
Yeah, that'll be really interesting to see if there's anything else out there that's just hiding in the game, waiting to be unleashed on players.
Well, they did do it with the capital chip. Like I saw a video, and it's still one of those for anyone who's into the game was a goosebump type video where you see this little Imperial shuttle go into I think it's a Star Destroyer, and the guy walks all the way through it, and then you see them invading a Corvette, fighting their way through the corridors, getting to the bridge, and then he goes up to the console, takes over the ship, and warps out. And you're like, jump to lightspeed, my bad, and. It goes off, does it, and you're like, I so want to do that. I can't fly a Corvette. How do I get to take a Corvette? And it was a demo video. They never released it into the game.
I remember when they released the Corellia Corvette instance. Was it just a teaser for that, basically, with no actual space flight included?
The Corellian Corvette you're talking about was the mission to get Master Pilot. That was one of the cool things, is where they made you go do that to get your Master Pilot.
Well, you call it cool. Probably some people had an issue with that.
But the whole thing was, if you shoot from the bottom, take out one of the turrets, you can then pick the thing apart and then just destroy it piece by piece. Once someone figured it out, you then got, and this is a social thing to the game, you then got pilots helping other pilots to do that. They go and say, okay, I'll take out the first turret, you kill the rest of the ship, you get your badge. And I don't know, it's just a different mechanic. I've run into it in a few different games where you have something like that, kind of a gating to getting a master level or something. But even the way Galaxy started off with this thing, you had this apprentice XP stuff. Whereas you couldn't get master unless you physically trained your skills to players who needed
somebody else.
Oh yeah, God. Oh, I completely forgot all about that.
Yep.
And then it got taken out.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
I actually remember when they took it out, and I was actually a little upset with it because I had an entire apprentice network out there because I had taught other people, and it reinforced the social aspects of the game to such a heavy degree because one of my earliest apprentices, my Padawans, ended up becoming the architect that built our entire player city. And he might not have done that if it wasn't for the fact that one day in Coronet, I think it was, is that the name of the capital on Corellia?
Yes.
Man, it's been forever. But he was sitting there in chat asking for somebody to train him something. And I needed apprentice XP, so I trained him with it, and we started a conversation. We became friends in game. And again, like I said, he ended up advancing to becoming an architect to the point that he built our entire city. He was the one that built our town hall on the day that Player Cities came live.
That was one of the coolest mechanics, though, about the whole crafting systems. Like, I chose to go armorsmith. got my basic artisan, and went armorsmith because I figured if I'm going to learn combat, I should learn how to protect myself first.
Sure.
And then out of nowhere, I get a tell in the system from some guy, and I think his name was James, Jaames actually, and he starts talking to me, asking me about what am I doing, how am I getting on with the armor crafting. I'm like, where's the webcam? What the hell's going on there?
I'm being
And then he says, no, I searched through the in-game. I saw you had like an apprentice box in Armorsmith. We're running this big fleet guild called EGC, something global conglomerate, whatever, galactic conglomerate, whatever they had it. But he put me on an apprenticeship program. He said, I need you to make the following components. Here's the resources you're going to need. What do you have? What do we have? And then when you do that level of armor, we'll move you up a box. And then you'll slowly take over production of that type of armor for the whole guild.
Because some of those
that's
supply lines
fantastic.
were so massive. Yeah, I was a part of a supply line for another armorsmith, even just as a tailor. Tailor and like entertainer were completely social classes, but the designers behind Star Wars Galaxies, I give a lot of credit to on this to Rafe Koster, who I really look up to. He's made some mistakes. Let's not deny that, but everybody will in their professional life. But I think that he's been one of the brainchilds behind Star Wars Galaxies and many of the interwoven systems that caused it to be such a social community success, even to this day. It goes to show that you don't have to make a game that's all about getting pretty things and defeating big monsters and stuff like that. A huge swath of the MMO playing community really just wants to play with their friends. And if they can make new friends on a daily basis that are reinforced by the systems of the game itself, they'll just enjoy it all that much more.
It kind of laid down a base of like a really social network, even when they started taking away some of these elements. Was it one of the times when we went back, my husband and I went back, like in January, we were just kind of wandering around the city and somebody just walks up to us, hi, starts chatting with us and he's like, hey, you want to come on my ship? I've got a ship with 3 turrets. Hop on board. I'll take you on some of the big scary space runs. And so we got in a ship, we wandered around, and we looked for a little while, and we oohed and we awed, and then we hopped in turrets, and we shot big spaceships and, stuff that we couldn't possibly do with the little spaceships that we hadn't leveled up all the way yet. But, it was just like, we hung out.
Let me change the conversation a little bit here, because I actually stopped playing prior to Jump to Lightspeed, or never participated into it. I can't remember which it was, but I was very much a ground-based crafter. And I gave people, they came to my shop and I served them. So I never participated in the space flight at all. Like Jump to Lightspeed completely slipped my radar. I never owned a ship. So tell me a little bit about, like, a lot of people have said in the past, and maybe I'll just ask your opinion on this. Should that have come with the launch of the game? Was it that fundamental a part of what ended up being Star Wars Galaxies that it should have been there from the start?
It is Star Wars. What's the biggest scene everyone remembers about the first movie? It's the final battle. It's the Battle of Yavin. It's the Death Star run. Mm-hmm. And it just wasn't there. But I got away with more here because, like I said, I missed 6 months of this, guys, that you suffered through.
Right.
So it was a short jump.
We played beta for
8-10 months. Exactly, yeah. You got the bugs out so I could enjoy the game. But for me, it was maybe, 6-7 months before I got the spaceship. And at that point, I was comfortable. I'd learned enough of the ground game to handle the space side. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I agree. It should have been something that was there from the start. But with all MMOs, they're going to come out without all the features complete. But I think for a Star Wars game to come out without actual Star Wars attached,
without the ability to go to these stars, it kind of left out half of the name. Like, there's no stars. There's just kind of wars.
They did have wars though, and I participated very little in the Galactic Civil War, being primarily a crafter. But I did have an alt who was a well. Let's talk a little bit about the combat system here, because I was a total cheese combat. I was a Terraskasi Swordmaster. I think you probably get nods of acknowledgement on what exactly that meant. It meant that I was a
melee
cheater.
stacker.
It meant that I was a cheater. It meant that if I ever got the drop on somebody, as long as they weren't like a rifleman, I would kill them. And the only reason that a rifleman could have the potential to be able to get the drop on me was because they had a longer range. But
my shot and headshot.
Exactly. So obviously the combat system had its problems. Now this is a long time ago, before the combat upgrade, before the NGE, which I think that this conversation can lead us up to that point. But I still love the system despite its faults, but only in theory. Am I alone in this?
It was crazy interesting.
Did either of you participate a lot in combat?
Not initially. I think we talked about a little before about how I got into it. You were talking about hiring bodyguards.
Yeah.
I took that to a whole new level with my crafter because the city we were in was, shall we say, lightly imperial. And at some point, the guys who were off doing the PvE stuff managed to get themselves a base, a little imperial base, and it will populate itself with stormtroopers, and it has a vulnerability window every 2-3 days. They have to defend it, that kind of thing. And you could run faction missions out of there to get your imperial XP up.
Yeah.
So I log in one Friday night and I start getting literally screamed at with tells going, they're in the base, they're in the base. I'm like, okay, who's in the base? What are you talking about? Some little rebel guy called, and I still remember to this day this guy's name. His name was Osiris, was in the bottom of the base, camped out, and anyone from our fleet or guild that were going in there were getting annihilated by this guy. He spent 2 or 3 hours killing everybody. And I'm
just
like,
just one guy all alone.
One guy. Oh, this guy was unbelievable. He was probably like you, a cheater. But he was down there killing everybody. And then I'm like, okay, I'm a crafter. I'm an armor smith. I have 0 combat skill here. The best I can do is get down and maybe, I don't know, throw some tools at him. Didn't do any good. So he just killed everybody. And eventually got bored and he buggered off. So I'm like, fine, whatever. And then I thought, right, okay, how can I really get to this guy? So being the little psycho I was at the time, I went off and got a second account. And I created myself a character, which I still use the name Nemesis. And I got him into this guy's guild. And I start doing some little espionage work, figuring out where all their bases were, how they operated, what their command
that's
structure
so
was.
sandboxy. This is like, this sounds like it could be a story out of Eve.
You.
All right,
But
go on.
then
Where did this go?
The trick was, what I started doing was, once I got the intel, I started figuring out, okay, how do you destroy these bases? And then it turns out, and this is another good mechanic, you actually had to have like 3 or 4 combat professions to go in and take out different terminals to blow up their bases. I found out they had 17 bases. I figured out I could hire a crew to hack these bases, blow them up, and I offered to pay them, because I was the money-making armorsmith, 2 mil for every base they took down, as long as I was there to get the screenshot.
Wow.
So over the course of about 2 months, we annihilated 17 bases across 3 of their cities, and it eventually led to that entire, they were called LAW, Last Alliance of Warriors. I don't know if that was the triggering effect, but it did cause a massive collapse in that group. And that was all because they pissed off one little crafter. I couldn't fight
one little
but I could use
crafter
economics
with very deep pockets.
Yes.
But that, to me, that was a brilliant part of the game. That was such a Star Wars thing. It's like, I may not be the guy to kick your ass, but I'm going to pay the guy who will.
Yeah, absolutely. You hire Han Solo if you can't get a ship yourself.
Yeah, the whole team of Han Solos.
Now, the combat system itself was unique. I think actually some of this showed up in Ultima Online as well. But it had one of the primary flaws was also one of its primary features, the ham system, the health, action, and mind, where your hit points, if you want to call them that, were actually split into 3 different pools that roughly represented your actual body health, your action points, and your mind. The problem was at the time of launch, you couldn't heal your mind. And for a long time afterwards, I don't even know, I don't think it was actually healable in combat at the time that I stopped playing.
No, I think they gave it to Jedi. Jedi were able to heal at one point, and I think Karaskazi had a meditation that could do it as well.
Yeah.
But that was it.
But otherwise, if you got targeted in your mind pool in any way, you were basically dead, which meant that any character that had an ability like eye shot, which I think was a smuggler or rifleman or something like that.
That's Bounty Hunter.
Bounty Hunter. And there were several other things. And combat medics could actually craft poisons that affected whole clouds, whole area effect, and drained the mind of anybody that was in those area effects.
You have to go find a dancer.
You had to go find a dancer. So
we bought a 3rd account to make a dancer on the off chance that we couldn't find one in our nearest cantina. So we would travel the dancer to the nearest cantina so that we could heal and keep playing.
That's something I saw with Player Cities. They would have AFK dancer bots there just so the people in the actual city could go back there and get that done.
But that was also a double-edged sword, because people that were actually active dancers, they didn't like seeing AFKers in their cantinas. So my Player City had a rule against AFK dancers, because we had so many local entertainers that wanted to staff the cantina, that they didn't want the AFKers to be able to take their business. But the concept of the ham, the 3 pool health bars, it did have its benefits, like the fact that you did have to seek out an entertainer to help you out. It reinforced the social codependence that the entire community had on one another. But at the same time, it made the entire combat system basically unwieldy and too easy to cheese, too easy to cheat. And you could get, Jedi Jimmy in the chat room mentions doctor buffs, which you could use to enhance your pools. Yeah. And if you had a really good crafter, a doctor that made really good medicines, you were a god among men. But then when those recipes and those resources started to be, distributed through the entire population, so that practically every doctor either knew somebody to buy medicine from or knew how to make the really good buffs themselves, then you got buff bots, which basically ruined the entire concept of the buffs to begin with, because then everybody had them, which meant that everybody had to have them to participate in the Galactic Civil War. You couldn't go into combat and expect to have an edge against an entire army of buff bots. It just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But you also had the problem with that of you could spend 10, 15, 20 minutes to get yourself combat ready with those buffs, and then you get taken down once and you're back to the start of that queue again.
Yep.
So it was a very disjointed experience from that perspective. So they did eliminate this later on, but it was a core feature, I suppose, of the early combat, and it really grated on the entire community to when they took it out to the point where you didn't need the buffs, but they were very advantageous.
Well, and it also bled over to other things, which I heard. I was talking with you before we started recording, Irish, about this. But like, let's take Wookiees, for example. When the game started, Wookiees could not wear armor. Eventually, they made this fix, and we'll talk about the cosmetic slot a little bit here. But that whole during that beginning period of the game, Wookiees couldn't wear armor because they were already buffed to the point that they had armor. But again, as the resources to create good armor started to disseminate themselves and started to spawn in the world and become available, Wookiee armor, that innate fur armor, just didn't hold a candle. It would be as if those Wookiees were strolling into combat naked compared to their compatriots who had full suits of composite or whatever they were wearing at the time.
Yeah.
It was a ridiculous imbalance that wasn't, well, I don't want to say that it wasn't thought of, but it wasn't thought through. I think that I want to try to stay away from bad-mouthing Sony too much, believe it or not, during this episode. But there are certain aspects of their development choices that I think that they didn't really grasp the entire concept of what a sandbox environment truly is. And I think
so co-interdependent on each other that, it was slowly building up. So, so you have these people and, now I have, now you're offering better minerals, and so I can make better stuff. And, I made a better harvester with these better minerals. And now the better harvester can get better minerals, even better minerals. And so it just kept climbing up and getting better. And as the whole system started rising, it's kind of hard to keep that balance, because then you kind of have to rebalance over time as each server essentially sort of rises at different rates.
Eventually, like I said, they did fix this for Wookiees. They enabled them to be able to wear armor, but it was not visible. But at the same time, they also introduced the cosmetic slots, which at the time when these were introduced into Star Wars Galaxies were a unique feature in the MMO world. I think maybe Guild Wars might have done this first, but they had a very limited where you basically chose a costume. It wasn't like in Star Wars Galaxies, you could choose whatever you wanted to be your cosmetic appearance and then have armor that was actually equipped beneath it, which led, admittedly, to entire armies of metal bikini-clad warriors coming up against you that were actually wearing full suits of stormtrooper armor or something like that, but they looked like an army of...
Hey, I only did that once.
That we can prove.
Very true.
But to this day, more and more MMOs have started to adopt this option of allowing players to look like whatever they want to look like. Even just very recently, World of Warcraft implemented something similar, allowing players to change the look of their appearance. So there's a number of systems that I feel that Star Wars Galaxies introduced to the MMO world that to this day are either... I feel like Star Wars Galaxies laid the groundwork for it, or just flat out just pioneered from top to bottom. Like the crafting and resource system, which actually I just found out while doing my research for today's episode, earned like 3 or 4 different patents for Sony. To the point that if anybody else tries to put these in their MMOs, they're going to have to pay licensing rights or patent rights for things like the randomly spawning resources that would, they'd cycle through on a regular basis and everything like that.
Yeah,
they
the
have a
resource
patent
shift.
for that. No, unfortunately, they put that technology on top of server tech that didn't work worth a damn. So it never really panned out all that well for them. But, they really, at a fundamental level, they pioneered new technology that the MMO industry had not seen. and some of it we still have not seen. What do you guys think about the whole resource and the whole crafting system? I mean, is this something that you think ever might see a resurgence in the MMO industry?
I don't know if anyone's going to put the development time into doing it because it's just so in-depth. And you guys kind of left before you ran into what I call like the ultimate crafting interdependency system, which was the Beastmaster when they brought it back. Because there was an element of that because it was a kind of like, we'll get into later, an expertise thing or a talent system, I think they call it in WoW. But there was a whole piece of that, which was the old bioengineer revamped. And in order to do that, you had subcomponents of your equipment from each of the 4 crafting professions. And only if those crafters had actually spec'd into the expertise for the same thing. So in order to have the equipment to run a bioengineering lab, you actually had to have at least 4 crafters going on. So the interdependency got massive. And like I really don't see anyone putting that in there because it's built layer upon layer. You had the resource shift you just talked about. You had quality involved in every layer of it. So the first thing is the resources have qualities. You've got massive diversity of types of resources. On top of that, then you have the hand equipment you need to access your schematics. You have the consoles in your house or whatever your public space was where you had to use them as well. Again, quality. But the quality then kicked into a little bit of the skill of the player because you had maybe 6 stats on any one given item, especially in Shipwright. So you could say, okay, I want this engine to be efficient on energy, but I also want it to be fast. But I notice if I put more points in speed, I lose it on efficiency. So you start balancing. There's so many tweaks to the different layers in that game. Like, imagine how much development time would go into just thinking that out, let alone implementing it.
I can't even begin to imagine. I mean, any of you guys know because I've been talking to you already, but, you know, I just recently hired on as a game developer for systems, which is exactly what this entire thing would be. I could not even begin to fathom where the brainstorms would have to start for this kind of thing to be implemented into a new MMO. It is so deep. It's just mind-boggling. It really is that anybody could think that. I'll just come out and say it. I don't think we're going to ever see this kind of thing in an MMO ever again.
As a game publisher, you have to weigh that. You'd be like, that is so in-depth. What percentage of the population is actually going to use it?
Exactly.
Is it actually worth your money to develop?
That's the other side of things. Is I don't know that modern MMO gamers, for the most part, would embrace such a complicated system. And I think that's kind of evident in the fact that Star Wars Galaxies has not had a huge population throughout its entire life. I mean, it's always been an also-ran. It's not even been as big as EverQuest. And that's kind of sad for something with such a strong, huge, well-known IP. I mean,
yeah, but the core component of that, Jeremy, is that this thing, it hasn't had the population. That's not because of the crafting system. It's because of the repeated combat problems we've had. That's what took the population out. The majority of the game are combat oriented, but the crafting community has always been there. Like, there's a website, I've got it in the links there. It's SWG Craft. It used to be .com, now it's .co.uk. That thing tracked resource shifts, and it gave new guys coming in who hadn't got the years of experience and built up an inventory the ability to find the resources and then maybe hunt them out in the game.
Yep. Yeah, right? I actually use that site quite a bit. It's been around for a very long time. And I agree, actually. I mean, the crafting community embraced and loved and still loves this system to this day.
Yep.
And if a new system came out in a new game that was similar, they would probably go and play it and love it just as much. But I don't think that a developer these days, and to another degree a publisher, would take the risk on implementing that series of features when it's already evident by Star Wars Galaxy's population levels that it's not going to be a juggernaut.
It definitely kept it dragging along. I mean, those social and the crafters kept it moving.
But again, that community of crafters could be 100, 200,000 people, which would, back in the day when the Star Wars Galaxies came out, that would have been a huge success in MMOs. But these days, everybody wants to be the next WoW. They want to be the next game with 10 million players. And you can't sell people on a 10-year development cycle to create this in-depth crafting system if you're only going to be playing to an audience of 100 or 200,000 people. I just don't see that being a reality. Now, another system, just to get away from crafting a little bit, as much as I love it, and I could probably spend the entire show talking about it, let's move on to something that, Heather, you and I actually spoke with last time you appeared here on the Morgue, and that was the housing system, which was tied directly into crafting, and also eventually ended up being tied into the Starship system as well, which is kind of like another form of housing, as I understand it. Like I said, I never had a starship of my own. Cry. But the housing system as well, Irish, I've already heard kind of many of Heather's opinions on this, and but what did you think of the housing system? And after you tell me what you think, tell me if you think that this is something we're going to be seeing in another MMO.
As I said, the first big thing for me with the whole Star Wars, it was my first MMO, and the experience for me was not just logging into a game, kill some things, log out of the game. It was being with a community, having a house in a city, having a mayor. Like at one point, I had to stand in for the mayor for a couple of weeks, and I kid you not, I actually got complaints that some guy put up a factory which blocked the guy's view next door, and he bitched to the mayor.
Oh my God, yes.
And I'm like, what the hell? Where else? What else game am I going to get this in?
Why do you think I
Lord
stopped being a
Association
mayor?
in
God,
Galaxies.
zoning rights and, oh, geez, we had like...
I put a quadrant system, and I actually zoned it so you had like little houses, medium houses, big houses, industrial complex.
Yeah, we had, oh man, I could go on for hours about that.
At tier 4 of a city, you end up getting a shuttle port, which suddenly tied you into the travel system in the game.
Yeah.
That was unique. I haven't seen that anywhere else. So that you actually come up on the planet map, and people can go to your city through their little shuttle port. Mm-hmm. But as you're saying, like again, it's an investment thing, and I really don't see that level of player housing going in there. You had your own little piece of the world. You had a little community piece of the world with the city hall, and you could decorate it. And actually, you told me you were an interior decorator, so
yeah,
you made a whole
yeah.
game system out of it.
I did.
But
that's how I made a huge portion of my initial investment to become, like, to help fund the city and everything, was people would pay me to move things in their house. How weird is that?
Stick that on the box of the game. What does that mean? It's like, hey, decorate the interior of your house. Like, that's a game mechanic you're going to sell me? I don't think so. But it's when you get a player in that does it, and you're like, actually, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because now every piece of junk that I get from beating up a Java or mugging some Tuskens or some other nefarious means, I can put it on my wall and go, hey, I kicked the Java's ass. Yep. Awesome.
Another really cool feature of that travel system that you just said is, like, that's one of the reasons that the city that I was a part of was so successful, is we were really near the Tusken Fort. So anybody that wanted to go there to beat up on Tusken Raiders, they tended to fly to our city after we got to Tier 4 and became a part of the travel system. So we had this huge influx of players that would come travel there, and on their way out would stop at our doctor's shops and get buffs, and would stop at the cantina and say hi and grab some food. And then, on the way out of town, maybe they'd also stop in the tailor shop and buy some new clothes. It was this whole social, oh man, it's so deep. It is so freaking deep. And this is one of the reasons that I think so many people are probably upset about the fact that Star Wars Galaxies is coming to an end later this year, is that I don't think that the bulk of gamers want this in their games anymore. And that's a really sad statement to have to make. But it also means that it would take a very unique developer to cater to the niche market that already exists in Star Wars Galaxies.
And it's so deep that you put in so much time and effort to even just little things like your house.
Yeah.
You're like,
Rotation.
I'm so proud of my house. I'm going to film it and put it on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh,
You're
God,
so
there's
proud.
tons of videos out there.
Or your ship, and you have everything decorated just right, and you're so proud of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they actually, in the last year or so, they put another piece onto that, which is I think you were probably aware of the card game they added on. Which most players didn't really care about the card game. Most players wanted it for the loot cards, which would give you like unique in-game housing.
Right.
Like the Empire Spire from Jedi. You could get that as a house. Jabba's Sails Barge, Yoda's Hut, all these little like unique little housing things. What other game is going to turn it into a prize, right? You're going to pay money to get these cards, to look for a loot, and keep going until some time you get a little hut. And what do you do with the hut? You decorate it. Again, put that on a game box and sell it to someone. It's not going to happen.
I'm a little frightened, to be honest, that the demise of Star Wars Galaxies might mean a fundamental shift in the MMO market away from sandbox gameplay. Now, we do still have EVE, which is a pretty big player in this, and it is an MMO sandbox. So I'm hoping that they can take up the mantle and keep this type of gameplay alive, because sandboxes have a certain amount of fun that just cannot be recreated in a typical theme park type of MMO. As the MMO industry continues to move forward, I don't see as many developers willing to take this chance. And I'm hoping, actually, and this could be just me talking out my butt here, but indie gaming is starting to get even more rooted in gaming industries, with the massive success of things like Minecraft, which is also a sandbox and almost an MMO, sort of. But the success of that type of thing and indie gaming in general, I'm actually hoping that sometime in the next 4 or 5 years, we'll see an announcement or a release of an indie MMO sandbox. And I think that might be the only area that hardcore fans of Star Wars Galaxies will continue to get their fix, unless they break the rules. Let's go ahead and talk about EMU a little bit.
I knew you were going to say that.
Now, have you actually experienced this, Irish? I think you mentioned...
I played this thing inside out when I heard about it. To explain this one, we probably need to talk about Combat Upgrade at NGE, the whole thing it did there.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
The original game, we talked about the skill system. You had 250 skill points. You could go in and spend them on a profession. You could end up being a hybrid, guy who shoots guns, who's also a crafter, who happens to be a dancer on the side. Does strange
you were
dance
just
videos.
you, and you spent your skills on anything in there.
I think you just described my uncle, Irish.
Actually, I was talking about maybe a little entertaining thing that you talked about in the live stream before you recorded.
Oh, right.
Your little music videos.
Balgosa, the Windspire Entertainment Group.
Exactly. But, so basically what happened was they take our 32 professions and they slashed it down to 9. And that just destroyed the community. That was what's called the NGA. There was a half step in between, and we've talked a little bit about this before. My personal opinion on it was the combat upgrade was supposed to fix all the imbalances, the complexities of a 32 profession combat system.
Mm-hmm.
It was didn't quite get it.
Right.
Supposed to. And
now, I was actually still playing at the time of the combat upgrade, and for most of my friends, it was like, it's change. Change is bad. Change hurts. But on a whole, it could be seen as a potentially good step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then they hit us with the NGE. And just like you said, just gutted the system from 32. Was it 32 down to
32?
Just it was terrible. And I thank God that I was not around when the NGE hit. I had stopped playing prior to that. But leading up to that, there was also the whole Jedi Grind that was starting to eat away at the community as well.
Yes.
Well, you had 3 different versions of that as well. For each of the 3 periods of the game, you had 3 different Jedi. You had the pre-CU guys, which was based on this mystical holocron idea, where you get a little holocron, you ask it, and it goes, you should be a tailor. You're like, so
now let me talk about that a little bit, because that's actually what drove me away from the game, was the hologrind. For a long period of time, and maybe you didn't experience all of this because it didn't come out until 6 months later in Europe, but for a long period of time, nobody knew how to make a Jedi. And when the first people started to figure it out, that there was these holocrons that would tell you what to do, there was huge portions of our little tight-knit community that we had built that suddenly started to shift. Started to do other, like we had a famous droid engineer, like the best on the server, that would make everybody the absolute best droids in lickety split. He was incredible. And then all of a sudden he was a doctor the next day. And then 3 days later he was a pistolier. And it was like, where'd our droid engineer go? We had a community built around the fact that this guy was a huge draw to our city.
And I would tell you 3 of the 4. So there were people who went through all 13 professions and, as fast as they could, just didn't care about anything except just getting through it all.
And, you got to admire some of them with their dedication of being able to go through that and finally unlock Jedis. And good on them, but it had such a negative impact on the rest of the community that was either not interested in it or not focused enough to, participate in it themselves. That
at the very start, Jedi was permadeath after 3 deaths, too.
Yeah, so that was also a big risk.
It was gone. Absolutely gone.
Maybe you guys can correct me on this, but wasn't if you activated a force power within view of anyone,
oh, gosh.
you ended up on the bounty hunter terminals?
On you.
No. What got worse than that? You being a Jedi and you're pushed off into a corner. The way it worked is you unlocked a slot to create a new character, and that character was your Jedi.
Right.
Now, if you're off doing your grinding stuff, whatever else, and you're on your own, that's fine. If you are in a group, again, you were fine, but there was, I don't know if it was a bug or what it was, but if there was pets on the people in that group, or even droids, apparently they ratted you out to the Empire and got you points on the bounty hunter system.
Gosh.
It's like, seriously, this guy has a cat walking around, the cat ratted me out to the Empire?
His Rancor told the Empire where to find you?
Meow, meow, meow.
It's just like, what the hell? But anyway, the point being, you got ratted out, you end up on the bounty hunter terminals, next thing you know, you're in forced PvP. The next stage of that, initially it was just you went out in the group, you somehow gave away your position, something ratted you out to the Empire, bounty hunter comes and kicks your backside. Later on, it got to the point where the Jedi bounty hunter thing needed to be expanded, so more groups got involved in bounty hunting, and what they did was they created an opt-in process, where if you go into a PvP zone or you engage in a PvP fight and you get taken out, a little pop-up says, do you want to put some credits to put a bounty on that guy? Like, oh, hell yeah. Click, 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 send.
Monetary revenge.
I was like, I can't beat you in the game, but somebody else can.
Well, and that kind of mechanicalized it, put it back into the system, exactly what you did earlier with paying people to take out the enemy's bases.
That was just more fun, though. That was just, I don't know. It was more Machiavellian the way.
Okay, but we've kind of... we've kind of distracted ourselves a little bit here. We started off by talking about the combat system as it relates to the combat upgrade in NGE that came out later. Did you guys, Mars, did you experience the NGE? I actually quit prior to that.
I did experience it. Change hurts and change is scary. But it didn't strike me as hard as it did a lot of people. I mean, I was just like, aw, it's different. Oh, well, I'm going to keep having fun. Except then I couldn't find anything on the forums. Not if I paid someone to search 8 hours a day on the forums, because it was full of kajillion people saying 400 times a day,
the NGE sucks.
Stupid.
Change it back. Irish, did you experience this firsthand as well? The reason I'm asking both of you this is I'm wondering if you have any comment, like, did it make the game better? Did it make the game worse, as everybody claims? Or is it just something that kind of had to happen?
I think, I've said this before, I think we talked offline about maybe on TeamSpeak server or something about it, where to me what happened was the combat upgrade didn't bring the success they expected that LucasArts was involved in. And I think behind the scenes, LucasArts went off, and this is the way it felt because the Sony teams were still developing content like the creature handler system, which burned me big time when I lost it.
Yeah.
And I think published 25 was the NGE. So maybe within 2 months of each other. But what really kicked it was, it seemed like Sony were not prepared for NGE coming in and cutting all the professions away and essentially changing the whole game. So they seem to be as slighted as what the actual player base was, but obviously the player base is a lot more vocal than developers are going to be. The biggest thing for me was like losing the professions, and yes, it was a massive rip to a lot of players in the game. I had just discovered the whole idea of creature handler, going out, finding layers, taming these things, bringing them off, training them as pets, going out, learning commands, and scaling them up. It was a fantastic sub-game.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that profession disappeared with NG. 9 professions, there wasn't room for creature handler. Now, you asked the question there about whether or not it improved or whether it made the game better. Initially, I will say no, but I'll tell you 2-3 years later, the game and the content of the game now, if you could somehow bring back that profession system from pre-CU with the 32 professions, would be the ultimate SWG game. The content that's in there now, and we've talked about this, heroic instances, the Hoth instant, all this other fantastic Star Wars game content.
And all the jump to light speed
give me back
stuff.
my sandbox.
Yeah.
Give me back my sandbox. And then 2 things together, you're there.
Well,
but no,
now
NG is devastating.
This is exactly why we started this whole train of conversation, is because if you're an old-time player out there like the three of us are that want to experience the old days of Star Wars prior to the NGE, you do have an option. Now, I will disclaim that this is not entirely above board. There are no licenses installed here. The people running this project don't necessarily have the permission of LucasArts or even Sony to do this. Now, that being said, this is an incredibly awesome project, and if you want to be involved with this, it's called, correct me if I've got the site wrong here, but swgemu.com.
Yeah, that's right.
That'll get you on the road to experience basically the old days of Star Wars Galaxies through an emulator, which is basically they took the code and reverse engineered it and created a way that you can play on their servers using your old clients, using all the assets that were provided by the original Star Wars Galaxies clients on your old server. So if you've got a box like Irish has here, and it looks like Mars is trying to find hers. So if you've got the old boxes,
again.
then you can potentially play them on these emulator servers, which I'm told don't contain any Sony code, that it's been completely reverse engineered with no help by Sony.
The way they've done this is all the art assets and everything else for the game are, and the mechanics, basic mechanics, are in your game pack on your game CDs. What they've done is, the way they've tried to explain this was they look at the packets the client tries to send, and they figure out what the server should be responding to it. And then they build a server that does that. So they have literally built this thing from the packet level forward, and I don't know if you guys have actually played it, but I went into it maybe a year ago, because at that point I just wanted to see the old Galaxies. I want to see my old professions back.
Right, yeah.
Went in, ran it, played it, started leveling, and thought, wow, this is actually it's the old Galaxies. It's the same old crappy combat problems I had. And it actually broke the nostalgia for me a little, because like, wow, there were problems in this game I don't remember.
You can't go home again, can you?
Yeah, it wasn't the same, but it was still better than what I had with the professions available to me in the real Galaxies.
And if you out there watching along are just a hardcore fan of pre-NGE Star Wars Galaxies, this may be a valid route for you. Well, like I said, not entirely above board, but a valid route to try to experience this for yourself, because now that Sony is locking down their servers, is closing these down in December, this would be the only option that anybody out there has to experience Star Wars Galaxies ever. pre-NGE, post-NGE, anything like that. Without having somebody host the servers, it'll be gone forever. So now I got to voice kind of my concern here. As I said, there's no licensing. So it is possible that with this whole, LucasArts is apparently the reason that Star Wars Galaxies is closing down in the first place, that they pulled the license, did not allow Sony to renew their license, so that assumably they could have a monopoly with BioWare's and Tor and all of that. But that also leads me to worry whether or not LucasArts will potentially go after the EMU project now that it would potentially pick up so much steam. I'm hoping that doesn't happen because I love this kind of grassroots sort of thing. And actually, it seems like some of the developers at Sony are also watching this with interest. There's been an interview with John Smedley several years ago that basically said these guys are doing some pretty incredible work. These guys and the EQ emulator project, takes the old school EverQuest, and you can play that as well. It's not something that they specifically want to shut down because it wasn't costing them any money. Well, licensing costs money. So we'll see where that all lays out. Now, that pretty much brings us to the end of everything that I wanted to discuss. Do you guys have any closing thoughts on this that you want to share?
They had one of the new versions of how they did the Jedi, and it was, kill a kajillion little creatures and wander around a town.
Oh, you're talking about the Force village, the Force sensitive village.
Oh, really?
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That town of evil. And I sat down and essentially had to build up enough XP to buy it, and the town went through different phases, and you had to wait till it came back to your phase again. So I went out and I mapped out, how much XP were we earning per hour, and I said, all right, this is how many hours on these various days we're going to be playing, and that'll get us up to this point. Now we have to wait till it comes around to the next go around, and it was, I had a whole spreadsheet of calculating it out. And
leave it to you to science it up.
Yeah, I totally scienced it up. And then I decided it was going to be like 6 months before we get to the end of it. And we were just like, no.
Yeah. I actually stopped playing just like a month or two before the Force Village came out. Then it did launch, and I tried it for like a week. And that was pretty much what put the nail in the coffin for me on Star Wars Galaxies, because I was already bitter about the fact that the Holocron grind ruined my community, the one that I had built up. And so just...
NG was you just log in and go, I want to be a Jedi. Click.
Click. You're a Jedi.
Oh, Jesus.
That was it. It was a starting profession. 9 starting professions. One of them was Jedi.
Can you imagine the point of view from somebody that actually went through the hologrind and then got NG?
Hang on. I'll make this worse for you. I have a pre-CU Elder Jedi. So I did the original hologrind.
Oh, man.
I have an Aurelian Jedi. Elder Jedi as well.
Man.
You know what you got? Apart from the abuse of the new guys coming and going, where do I get a lightsaber? You're like, I'm going to kill you. You get the one thing you got was a command. Was it like /blue glowy? You basically got Force Ghost. That's all you could do. You got a cloak and a crystal, but like really the only thing they gave you was you could go Blue Ghost, which was nice for taunting the new guys if they were pissing you off.
Yeah.
Just go, I can do this. Look at me. I'm a ghost.
I'm better than you are.
Not great.
Well, I'm curious to see. I'm actually going to go ahead and load up the EMU. I'm going to check this out to see if I can reclaim any of my nostalgia, because as I was discussing with the chat room between segments here, Star Wars Galaxies has always been one of my favorite MMOs. Even on my top list of top 5, I'd probably say it's number 1 from the experience that I had prior to the NGE, just until I stopped playing. That sense of community, of interwoven in systems, and the solid depth of the crafting system and the resource system and all of that, it just endlessly impressed me and just created this. To be honest, Star Wars Galaxies is probably the reason that I've become a game developer. I think it would be safe to say that, because until I played that game, I never really thought of a game as anything other than something to play to have fun. But I had to shift my whole mindset to play Star Wars Galaxies as a successful member of a crafting community, because I had to be good and I had to understand all of the depths of these systems. I think that it's fundamentally, I think I need to thank Sony. Sadly, as much as I didn't really want to say that in my show, they really inspired me with this game to be where I am today. And so, yeah, thanks to them.
Since you even floated the idea of doing a show about Galaxies as one of the episodes here, there's way too much and bad press, and it's way too easy these days to just rip on Galaxies. Mm-hmm. If you don't recognize what this thing brought to the landscape, I use this as a yardstick. Like, I'm from the other show, I'm playing Star Trek Online.
Yeah.
And I heard crafting system. I was like, yes, crafting system. And then I got it. I'm like, I take this thing I looted, I put it in that vendor, and I get this thing back. I didn't craft.
How is
I just
that
bought something
crafting?
from a vendor.
Yeah.
Right.
Where's my crafting?
Yeah,
So
after you go through the
it's
Star Wars
become a
Galaxies
yardstick.
crafting, everything else is just like, oh.
It is.
click.
It's a yardstick
Yeah.
by which everything else can be held up to. And as much as I don't think that we will ever see a system as in-depth as what Star Wars Galaxies had, a large portion of the community that's playing MMOs now, and will maybe even the large portion of the developers still making MMOs to this day, should take away some inspiration from that, from the fact that you can create something that is really, that makes your players think, and they will appreciate it. Maybe not all of them, but the ones that want to participate in those systems will love
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And everybody else will just be impressed because you put so much brain power into it. So I think that that's a good point to just say goodbye, Star Wars Galaxies. We'll miss you. And that brings us to the conclusion of the final episode of The Morgue. I know many of you out there, my viewers and my steadfast audience, have been really upset to hear that this show is passing away into the ether. So I wanted to let you know that there will still be more of me on the internet. First of all, you will still be able to get a hold of me on Twitter, at JBJeremy. That's going to be my personal Twitter account. I'll probably be making another one for my new position at Cryptic, but I don't have that information handy just yet. You can also always reach me by emailing jeremy@jupiterbroadcasting.com, and I will tease you guys a little bit that I'm going to stay here as a member of Jupiter Broadcasting. Chris and I have already been talking about launching a new show, and perhaps even a return of one or two of the older ones as well. Stay tuned to Jupiter Broadcasting to hear the latest on any developments on that front, and until I see you guys all again, play smart, everybody.